And
We're on.
I
Okay.
should be looking at you right
Yes.
now, the camera.
Okay. We're talking today with Steve Kenyon of Grand Rapids, Michigan. We are at the 2017 LZ Michigan event sponsored by WGVU here in Grand Rapids. And Steve, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Sure, Jim. Hey, and thank you for allowing me to talk about such a wonderful subject, because it's, love of God, family, friends, neighbors in the United States of America, those of us who serve. So, Jim, I'm a Butterworth Hospital baby here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, born in 1960, and went to Ottawa Hills High School, one of the City of League high schools, wonderful, great Grand Rapids experience. Went to Grand Rapids Junior College, got an associate's degree there, then on to Michigan State for a couple of degrees, a couple of bachelor's degrees, did a little bit of law school, natural gas business, military, 34 years in the United States Army, reserve and active, and
Okay.
been blessed.
Okay, so to back up a little bit, when did you initially enter the military?
Sure. It's interesting. I grew up, my dad retired as an Army colonel.
Okay.
And he was logistics, armor, and medical service. And my dad, again, my hero, wonderful guy. He, in February of 1980, I'm a sophomore at Grand Rapids Junior College, and Dad works downtown at Michigan Consolidated Gas Company. He happens to be the commander of the 394 Station Hospital here in Grand Rapids. Has a Cold War hospital, 500 bed, which is a huge activity. Cold War mobilization, they would move to Heidelberg or Frankfurt, Germany, take over a facility. So, growing up, admiring my dad in the military, took us to summer camps with him. So I just always loved the military, but it's interesting, I never really thought of joining. And again, that's an era when military is not very popular to a lot of other people. And just one morning, my dad, a lot of times would drive me to school, drop me off, because his office was closed, JC right downtown here, now Grand Rapids Community College. And just one morning, he just said to me, Steve, have you ever thought about the military? You've got leadership qualities. I said, well, interesting, Dad. I didn't really respond to him. Well, 1 week later, I was in the recruiter's office. I can still remember to this day, Staff Sergeant First Class Jerry DeCoke. And within, an hour later, I signed an 8-year service obligation as a enlistment, as a medic, an Army medic. Mm-hmm. And, so I start 1 month later, I'm in uniform as an E1. That's as low as you can be on the totem pole. With the 394 Station Hospital, I haven't gone to my basic training yet. But so a unit of about 450 soldiers, I was 450. Now, coincidentally, my dad was number one. He was the commander of the 06. And, it was just a wonderful experience. Loved it. So many great friends. And I went on, enlisted then for about 8 months, and then enrolled in the Army ROTC at Michigan State University, graduated, distinguished military.
So they did
graduate,
not send you
commissioned.
off for basic training anywhere along the way?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I went
Okay.
to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Yes, sir, I sure as heck did. Fort Knox. And
So when were you there?
that was July of 1980.
Okay,
And,
somewhere in Kentucky. Okay.
And yes, boy, oh boy, I can still taste that, combination, kind of like the day here we're having in Grand Rapids. High humidity and hot, but there's that red clay dust that gets into your mouth, and you just can't get rid of that taste. And there's 3 hills, Misery, Agony, and I forget the other. Everybody who's done basic at, in that time, that's when it was the, Fort Knox was the armor school. Now that has moved to Fort Benning since, but General Patton's Museum, all of the wonderful things. Great experience. It was tough, and loved it. Loved it.
Okay. Now, do you think you went in there with a little bit better idea of what to expect than a lot of other guys did?
Yes, sir, I did. Yeah, I sure did, and I was motivated. Mostly just that attitude of the finish line. I knew I was going to get there, and I was prepared, it was an exciting adventure to me. It is interesting. That's a whole different conversation on itself. You know, essentially, you arrive on a Greyhound bus with 40 other guys. You get off the bus and different hair, certainly different clothing, and 40 different guys. Well, about 3 hours later, you walk out of the building with the same haircut, wearing OD green. We were still wearing fatigues back then, and you know, the shock starts. And then, then those first couple of nights sleeping in open bay barracks with 40 guys who snore and sleepwalk and on and on and on. And we lost a couple of guys, but we all made it. A great experience. You know, those drill sergeants who were tough as can be, but you know, they've got such tremendous, they're some of the most loving people in the world. They love the United States of America. They know that our military needs tough, competent, good soldiers. And, a few times those guys are great character. You'd see them, it was fun.
They actually did care about people?
They would never tell you that. You know, we were scum. But, at graduation, and I was blessed, I was the number one, I was the platoon leader for my platoon. So a combination of peer ratings and then this cadre, and let me tell you, that competition was tough. And at the end, our last, they broke character when we left one time, and we saw a smile, we saw that firm handshake and that pat on the back, but then their faces got stern to say, you go on and you do what you're supposed to do, or I'll be on your ass.
Did you get a chance to find out at all why the other guys were there, what motivated them to join? Or did you not talk to them enough to know?
On the one hand, there's a little bit of, you're still kind of independent guys, don't talk a lot initially, but then the force of the experience, we shared our lives very quickly because we succeeded and become a very well-knit, strong team. And a combination of some guys just not having anything else better to do. Other guys, there were a lot of, not a lot, but I would say maybe 10-15% of the other troops were military dependents, and that was expected of them. Interesting, back to my dad, it was expected, but it was only just one little hint, and then I did it.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of other people in the middle, including, there were some guys that were in just such an interesting group. There were some guys that, had trouble with the law and otherwise just trying to find direction. We also had an interesting group of guys who were Mormons. And about a half dozen of them, they were all from the University of Utah, and they had done it. I learned so much about them. They were just phenomenally tremendous guys. They had already done, which I had no idea, in their faith. They did 2 years of missionary duty overseas, and boy, they were tough. Most of the group I went through basic training went on to become commissioned officers.
Okay.
And,
all right. Now, were you was this a class of people who were all slated to be medics, or could you just be anything?
Yeah, everything.
Okay.
When you're on that, we have what's called one station unit training. Didn't have that at that time, but that's where, for instance, the second level of basic training is called advanced individual training, where you get your specialty. So we do that now. So infantry OSUT, in fact, I was battalion commander of a related at Fort Benning, related unit, but anyway, so infantry soldiers do their basic and their advanced individual training for Fort Benning, go to Fort Leonard Wood to become an engineer or military police. Fort Sam Houston, actually no basic training there. There's only a couple of basic training bases, but so our guys did everything.
Okay.
And that was one of the few, and I was commissioned initially infantry, medical service. There were one of my good friends from the University of Utah became a medical service officer. We crossed paths later.
Okay, so we're going to back up here. So your summer of 1980, you did your basic training at Fort Knox. Now from there, do you go back to Grand Rapids again for a while, or what comes
I sure
next?
did. Yep, back to GR, back to reserve status, and then I had graduated from Grand Rapids Junior College, and I actually became I was advanced to PFC, part of my enlistment bonus, enlistment incentive, no bonus money-wise, but because if I got my associate's degree, then I did become a PFC,
Mhm.
and then that fall enrolled at Michigan State. Stayed as a medic, stayed enlisted at PFC until about November, and as I say, that's the other thing. My plan was to seek officer commissioning. I wanted to be enlisted for a number of years, and then no guarantee about becoming an officer, but then some good guidance, and it was the right guidance. Enroll in Army ROTC, get that leadership training, and it was thrilling. So at that time we had what was called the simultaneous membership program. That's where a soldier could, if affiliated as a contracted ROTC cadet, administratively advance to E5 pay, cadet rank, not enlisted, not an officer. And I happened to be the first one in the state of Michigan in the Army Reserve. There were some others Army Guard. What was real interesting about that, though, is the enlistment contract continued in the background while you're going through ROTC. So and we had one guy at Michigan State that washed out. He reverted back to his enlistment contract and became, he went from doing pretty well as a cadet to suddenly an E3 again, and 8 years as in advance.
So you are basically accumulating time in service that way, whereas if you're ROTC, you're not officially in the service yet. So there's a difference in terms of your seniority?
Yeah, so other ROTC cadets, their situation was they were not members of the military until they commissioned.
Right.
And they could either be kicked out, or that was their decision point. My decision point was already made. And again, in the military, you talk about volunteering, you never volunteer. In reality, we do volunteer a lot for tough assignments. But ultimately, we're volunteers until we enlist or accept the oath of office as an officer. And then we're no longer volunteers. We're obligated. Yeah. And it's a sense of responsibility, and it's a good thing.
All right.
It's a good thing.
So when do you graduate from Michigan State?
1982,
Okay.
June of '82, and I was fortunate, a distinguished military graduate, and this isn't about me as much as it is the things that these programs provide. So I was offered a regular Army commission and go on active duty as regular Army, and I decided I wanted to get some more schooling, so I stuck around. I was going to get an MBA, ended up getting another bachelor's degree, and then I did a year and a half of law school. But what I was going to say, my final semester at Michigan State, I was the cadet battalion commander, which was just a thrilling, and at the end of the school year, and leading that corps of cadets, which was about 150 strong at Michigan State in 1982, it was just really fun. In fact, current president Luanna Simon, she presented me the award from the university. Actually, is a saber for the cadet battalion commander. So I have my saber etched with my name in Michigan State, my cavalry saber from Dr. Luanna Simon. She was the provost at that time, and now she's the president. I've seen her a few times since. She doesn't remember me, but I sure remember her.
Okay. Now, at the time you're going through in the 80s here, was there any kind of residual Vietnam stuff in terms of how people viewed people in the service, or did your fellow students and everyone else just kind of view it as no big deal?
Yeah, that's interesting, Jim. It was a little bit of a confusion. People didn't generally know how to treat the military. We're far enough after the Vietnam War that a lot of the misconceptions and the tragedy is far away. But, I served with a lot of non-coms, non-commissioned officers who were Vietnam veterans, and again, the experience, and these guys were a wealth of information and experience. They were great. On that, though, the world has always been an unsafe place. So we had, very quickly after I got commissioned, and I was actually at Fort Sam Houston, Texas in '83 when Grenada comes off. And in fact, we had one of my fellow cadets graduated a year earlier, was involved in that operation. And then, of course, we have Panama not too much later. But one of the other remarkable things, Fort Sam Houston is the medical command for the Army. Now it's medical command for all services. And the Brooks Army Medical Center is the MedCen, and the Burn Center for the world is right there. Well, I'm in my basic course there, OBC, and the casualties came back from Panama, including, there was a young lieutenant who had in a helicopter crash, and his legs were severed just below the hips, and we're officers in training and giving blood, and then going and seeing those soldiers. There were about 13 soldiers that came to Brook, and that was my first contact with they were all my age, and seeing how life changes. Yeah, still remember that.
Okay. All right. So you said now. So what you've been doing then, you complete Michigan State. You stay on for more education. So you still remain at that point on reserve duty,
Yes.
then with the Army, and still at enlisted rank at that point. You haven't taken a
No,
commission
no.
yet? Or?
Oh yeah. My commission, 12 June 1980.
Okay.
That is my commission date. Second Lieutenant Butter Bar, and again,
Or 80 or 82?
82.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
All right.
82.
Historian
82.
dates.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Well, I'm a chronological guy too. Very important.
Okay.
So yeah. Then I back to the 394 Station Hospital.
Yeah.
I initially started as a commissioned officer, then as the S1. S1 is personnel.
Mm-hmm.
I moved through logistics and operations. I was the medical, the patient administration officer. Did a whole lot of interesting things there, and then I transferred to the field artillery. We had at that time 8-inch self-propelled howitzers, 4th Battalion, 20th Field Artillery. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, who's a wonderful, nationally recognized person in his own right, he and I were in the same regiment. We crossed Front Lines of Freedom, if I can say that. Now we interviewed him on Front Lines of Freedom. So same regiment, 20th Infantry or Artillery Regiment. He was 1st Battalion, I was 4th Battalion. So that was the M110. We don't have that weapon system in the inventory now, but a phenomenal 8-inch self-propelled howitzer. So we could kick that 250-pound round out some 18 miles, 100-meter kill radius. We were a nuclear-capable unit, half a kiloton nuclear round. I was the S2, Security Intelligence Staff Officer for a year, and then I was the Headquarters Battery Commander. Through all my experience in 34 years in the Army, the two most hardest working soldiers I've ever seen are field artillerymen and then infantry soldiers. I was an infantry battalion commander too. And they worked the longest hours, the toughest duty, and they had the highest morale. They were they were terrific. Loved it.
Okay. Now, where does the Fort Sam Houston Officer Basic Training fit into your timeline here?
Okay, that was the fall of 1983. So I had my second bachelor's degree in June of '83. That was about 3 months at Fort Sam Houston, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So then I've done my basic course. Now I returned to Fort Sam Houston a dozen times in my career for Officer Advanced Course, medical service, a medical logistics officer course, and other.
Now, the Officer Basic course, then, what does that actually consist of?
That is, and at that time we had the Allied Army Medical Department, or AMED, is the largest collection of branches in the Army, and so the hard skills are Army Nurse Corps, Medical Corps doctors, Dental Corps dentists, Veterinary Corps vets, Army Specialist Corps. Those are our physician assistants, our dietitians, and our physical therapists. Those are the hard stripes. Mm-hmm. Then we had, the hard professionals, we had all of our allied scientists, and then medical service administrative operations is my. So we had a collection of those in my officer basic course. Again, I was on the side of, I was already infantry, I was already field, training guy. So, those who weren't as experienced sleeping in tents and getting shot at and otherwise, we helped them through, and they taught us a lot too. They were smart and we were tough. Mm-hmm. We were a good team.
All right. Now, when you complete that, do you go back to school again, or now are you going on for regular active duty?
I didn't have active duty required at that time, so I went back to Cooley Law School in Lansing and did a year and a half there and working and so forth, and then continued on reserve duty until I mobilized a couple of times, mobilized 3 times. So Operation Joint Endeavor Bosnia, that is April of 1996, and fascinating. That is a story in itself. The Balkan, the former Yugoslavian, ethnic cleansing with the Serbians, and I mean, there's hundreds of years of ethnic rivalry. We didn't have the mass casualties. We went in there with a strong force. I mobilized as the operations officer in charge, if you will, of about 370 medical personnel from the Midwest. In a fascinating group, of which about 70 physicians, Army Medical Corps, and then Dental Corps, and we backfilled all of the, first of all, at that time, 1996, we're down to 3 hospitals in Europe. The medical center is at Landstuhl, co-located with Ramstein Air Base. It's the European Regional Medical Command and the Medical Center. We have a combat support hospital in Wurtsmith, near Leighton Barracks, where the 1st Infantry Division had its flag at that time. And then in beautiful Heidelberg, we had the last MASH hospital, the 212th MASH. Beautiful place to go and visit. And then we had 17 medical clinics and dispensaries all over Europe. I got to travel. So I went there, and I coincidentally, the G3, the General Staff, General Kevin Kiley was our commander, phenomenal. He went on to become the Surgeon General of the Army, and his staff, G3 is operations. That officer had rotated out while I went in as a Army Reserve liaison, but I get to sit in that seat essentially, co-head. So I saw a bunch, traveled, and some of the highlights there. And this gets back to the integration. The core competencies are twice the citizen Army reservists who are out in the civilian sector in for-profit facilities, universities. We had the Mayo Clinic. We actually had 2 department heads from the Mayo Clinic. We had the chief nurse from the University of Michigan. Phenomenal people. 2 things. The 3 hospitals were going through their joint accreditation that summer. The active duty folks were as scared as, it's not nice to say they were scared, but they were apprehensive. That is a huge thing to go through. Our Army reservist crew, piece of cake. They took them through that. Again, our op tempo wasn't anywhere near what we thought it would be. We didn't have the mass casualties coming out of Bosnia. We got through all 3 hospitals, passed the joint accreditation. It was a huge victory, and a lot of medals came out of that. 25 June 1996, 02 in the morning, I'm in my hooch, sleeping, and I was the officer in charge of the Critical Action Center. At 02, I get a call on my hooch from the Operations NCO, and this gets back to those non-coms, those sergeants. Again, we as officers lead units, non-commissioned officers, sergeants lead men. They were sharp. So I get this call. There's been a bombing, and we stood up the critical action, the command center immediately. So I'm there about an hour later. And what's going on? Well, the Khobar Towers, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, has been bombed. 19 American servicemen, Air Force, pretty much killed instantly. Medical care in Saudi Arabia at that time is really good. Most of the people that staff those hospitals are American civilians. They go to Saudi Arabia for a couple of years, make a boatload of money. They had great medical care. Their initial stabilization was fantastic. We kicked in, and I'll tell you what, and it is the example of drilling. That entire medical command just kicked in, including by 06 that morning, the dependent community. We have an Army Reserve medical blood unit from Provo, Utah. Remember the staff sergeant? And they kick in place, and we are drawing blood. And again, these Americans are just jumping in civilians, and all of us, we all got poked. We didn't have a choice if we were in uniform, but the civilians, the dependents, they did. So we established an enormous blood bank. Within 4 hours of notification of that bombing, we had our command teams heading out. So those were, they were chaplains, psychologists, and social workers. Their job is to get down there and stabilize the force. Everything's okay. 8 hours, we had our first medical, and these were, it was an 8-hour flight. Not quite that long, but our first responders, again, if this were any other place, we would need medical capability. The stabilization was done with the military there.
Right.
So within about 16 hours, we started bringing stabilized casualties back to Landstuhl. My recollection is about 350 wounded. Again, 19 wonderful Americans were killed by those Islamic bastards. We brought about 240 back to Landstuhl. And again, these are young, a lot of females, Air Force. Most of them were 19, 20, 21, traumatic blast injuries, their faces, traumatic amputations. They were stabilized. We didn't lose a single patient. And returned to duty, about half of them returned to duty within 30 days, and the rest of them came back to CONUS, continental United States, to our medical centers, Eisenhower at Fort Knox, Bethesda, and Walter Reed at that time. Walter Reed and Bethesda are now one facility. They all survived. They all. It was a tremendous sense of accomplishment and doing what we're paid to do, or we're trained to do, what we want to do. It was a great experience. Americans. We were joint service, by the way, there at Landstuhl, so we were Air Force, Navy, Army. And wow, they did good. I was proud of them.
Now, how long did you wind up staying in Germany?
That ended up, again, we got cut loose early. We were about 5 months. Because, again, things stabilized. The Commander-in-Chief, European Command, front-loaded that mission. That's the way to do it. Going with overwhelming force, you can always scale back.
Right.
I was mobilized again for Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan, and then actually located at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. There's some good stuff.
Okay, so again, we kind of back up here. So 86, you're over in Germany. Did you ever get to
96.
96,
yes, sir.
Yeah, and then did you ever get to Bosnia itself, or did you just stay in Germany and things came to you?
The latter. Yeah, again, we were forward. Our assignment was to move into Bosnia. I would have moved in there as the medical OIC, and delays and delays and delays, and there were choke points. We had our logistical tail, is what we call it, the tooth to tail ratio, the tooth being the war fighters, the trigger pullers, and the tail is everybody else supporting. That literally got boggled down, so we kept getting delays on our line of debarkation. I'm missing some of the acronyms. Eventually got to the point where not necessary, so we stayed back and did a lot of good, and then released early.
And you were essentially replacing people who had been stationed there who had been sent forward.
Exactly.
So you're
active duty.
That whole sequence goes in place. Okay.
You know, we had another, at that time, coincidentally to today, we had another series of events with North Korea where we had response forces. As I recall, some of our forces were heading to South Korea and Vietnam. We were staffing up medical there because it looked like something could pop. Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, what does your unit do or not do at the time of the Gulf War?
Yeah, time of the Gulf War. Okay, so I'm with a medical group, is right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, 334th Medical Group. So we had, that's a command and control unit commanded by an 06. I was became the executive officer, who's the number 2 guy. I was also logistics before that, S4 and S3. Gulf War, I was detachment commander at that time, so I had a lower rank. I was a captain, no, I was a major. But anyways, we had 4 combat support hospitals and 13 other units: air ambulance, ground ambulance, preventive medicine, casualty control, all allied units. So we had to spin up 3 of those combat support hospitals, from one in Michigan, one in Ohio, one in Wisconsin, one in Indiana, we spun them up to head to the Persian Gulf War, along with a lot of the, so about a third of all of our troops got spun up, almost half. Most backfilled facilities in the U.S., we took the combat support hospitals and they deployed as one unit to the Persian Gulf. And again, I would have headed forward too. We had all of our contingency plans. We never got to that point because at 100 hours, that ground war was done. So, everybody starts, moving back. But again, a good experience. We actually saw some negative things during that period of time too, and I should reflect on that. Most of it was positive, but we did see, here's all the positive things. And of course, the Persian Gulf War, long overdue, welcoming those troops back with victory. And my goodness, our Vietnam War veterans, that was the parade. It was more for them than it was for, it felt good, and we have done such good things since, all the way to today. On the lessons learned side, we did go through a period there where we had certain officers and with full due respect, largely in the medical side, we had reserve forces. Again, our bang for the buck with reserve forces, about 11% of the budget, the defense budget, but 50% of the capability. When we look at medical, about 80% of our medical capability is in reserve and guard. So we called up a lot of physicians and said, okay, Uncle Sam needs you. We had pushback to a certain extent. This happened in other branches too, but we had others saying, whoa, I like the weekend pay, I like up doing something exciting, but I didn't sign up to go to war. The rest of us are saying this is we've been scrimmaging forever. We want to get in the game. We want to do what we've been trained to do. So there were individuals who truly, at a minimum, I would say, were disgraceful, and the Army dealt with that in a good way. Just let others go. But we reformed things after that and reinforced, and that's when our Army Reserve and our Guard, so our 5 reserve forces and 2 Guard, Air Guard and Army Guard, we became, wonderful thing, we are a strategic reserve. We were operational reserve during the Cold War. We could slowly get back into backfill. We had a year to get geared up. Operational or strategic reserve now. There are things, military police, 98% of our, or not military police, civil affairs, 98% of that capability is in reserve and guard status. And those are Americans, men and women in uniform, that sometimes get 2 days notice, and they go and they're ready to go. It's a huge success story. Fun to be part of it.
I think in some ways what you have going on is there was a long period when we really weren't doing a whole lot or deploying people and so forth, and you can get that kind of peacetime military mindset, and people can go in with only for the personal reasons maybe, and not really thinking about actually having to go someplace.
Yes.
And since then, of course, more recently, there has been more activity, more deployments, more people sent more places. It's more part of the package.
It's a mindset.
And you also learn
Yep.
the ropes, and you learn from experience, and so
Yeah,
got that there.
It gets back to volunteers. We're volunteers in the military, and again, prior to 1972 when we had to draft, and the same Americans, the most courageous and honorable, best and brightest, were the force, have always been the force. They are today, and by the grace of God and our inspiration, I'm very confident they will be going forward. But the mindset now, and some of the things that I'm involved in too, to get off not on a sales pitch here, but Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve, the OD Committee. Again, a culture where all American employers understand and support and value the military service of their civilian employees. Prior service veterans, current service members of Guard and Reserve units, future members who may say, I want to join because I can protect America. So the mindset that we have now, for instance, in the Army Reserve is, You come into the Army Reserve, plan on it. 1 year out of 5, you are in, it's called Army Reserve Force Generation. We are in the box. Every unit, and in a perfect rotation, you start out in year 1, crawling, you're getting your individual education, starting to assemble the team. You get into year 3 and you start scrimmaging. Go through all your battle drills and so forth, become a team. Year 4, you're validated. You can do your job. Year 5, you are the quick reaction force. So employers, and literally for our Guard, our Michigan Guard right now, and Guard members from all over the United States, helping Americans in Florida, and in very soon, and boy, I'll tell you, talk about good soldiers. I worked with them. The Puerto Rican Army National Guard, there's 2 brigades there. Those are some of America's finest. We're deploying people to go down there to help Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I say, with the Army Reserve Force Generation model, when you're in year 5, you tell your family, you tell your employer, we are the only ones that are standing between enemy hurting you. It's us.
Mm-hmm.
So, boss, honey, kids, any day now, I'm the one that's, if the balloon goes up, so to speak, I'm going. I'm trained, my team's trained, we're ready. We're the quick reaction force, and we will go. Get through that 5th year, now you're in year 1 of that cycle, which means unlikely, and you work on all these skills building again, but the reality is anybody can go at any time, because
you can have an natural
wars are
disaster
short.
happen, and,
Yes.
and you can
Yes.
have extended conflicts in certain
Yes.
corners of the world, and
Yeah.
maybe you need more people.
Yeah, exactly. And again, back to these skills, these skill sets that we bring to the active force with our reserve and guard. We're tough and we're good and we love America, and we're ready to go. And it's pride. It's pride from the inside, not and a lot of values that with the sad things going on in America today, those that they don't respect the flag, they don't understand what you and I know. American blood is red, and it's a unique color of red. It's American red, and 99% of that DNA in that blood is the exact same. We're brothers and sisters in arms, and God, you think of the sacrifices, and heroes don't talk. Any blabbermouth talks about how great they are. No, heroes know those that didn't come back, and those came back with as casualties. They're the heroes. So to disrespect our flag is just it's a sad thing, and it drains energy. To be respectful and part of this force, realizing the blessings of liberty, justice, honor, opportunity. They have been earned by the blood, sweat, and tears of America's most courageous and honorable, best and brightest. Being earned today must be earned in the future. We're a force for good.
Let's steer ourselves back now into your own service career here. So you had been out to Germany to support Bosnia. You had been organizing units and so forth to go into the Gulf War.
Yeah.
And then you get. We talked about that was before Bosnia and so forth.
I've got a couple other good things. Yeah. For me, Jim, I actually, it's a blessing. My experience as an enlisted soldier and as a commissioned officer, pretty unique. In the old days, we used to categorize our Army units as combat. Those are the trigger pullers. That's our special forces, our infantry, our armor. Combat support, military police, engineers, on and on. That combat service support, logistics. Now we call that sustainment. We use some different terms now, but for me, I actually, very unique. I've been in all 3 categories. So I've been medical, I've been an infantry battalion commander, the 1st Battalion, 339th Infantry Regiment, Polar Bears, American North Russian Expeditionary Force, World War I, World War II, part of General Mark Clark's 5th Army. Deployed my troops deployed to Iraq, 2 soldiers, and they have moms, they have families. Specialist Donald R. McCune, 20 years old, from Chelsea, Michigan, killed in action in Iraq, presenting the flag to his mother and his brother and sister. Staff Sergeant Todd Cornell from Chippewa Falls, outside of Milwaukee, In fact, Fort McCoy, the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy of Fort McCoy, the building is named after Staff Sergeant Cornell. He was killed in an action in Fallujah. 7 of my troops wounded there. So I had the infantry experience. Army Command and General Staff College is postgraduate education for us. That's the major school. So I went through it at Fort Leavenworth, and then I was selected to become an instructor. So I taught fundamentals of warfare, leadership. I'm a student of leadership, servant leadership, and then history, military history, World War II to present, which you and I have a love of history. So I did that, and then mission command. I do want to talk about one other very exciting medical mission, but battle command and mission command, the 75th Division out of Houston, Texas, the Great Lakes Division at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, just south of Great Lakes Naval Air Station, or Naval Station, I should say, in north of Chicago. By the way, for everybody who wants to watch this, the history, the beauty of Fort Sheridan, which is now demobilized,
or deactivated, or whatever you call it.
The term, I want to say,
decommissioned, maybe.
BRAC, base realignment and closing. So what started as 700 acres is now the Sheridan Army Reserve Center, which is Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Guard, about 150 acres, including, very uniquely, the AFRICOM, it's the security, the intelligence security. I'll think of the name, the acronym here in a minute. But that uniquely is right there at Fort Sheridan. But the old base is now the town of Fort Sheridan. It's a National Historic Landmark. Absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. The generals' homes there, they're $8 million homes in the civilian sector. It's gorgeous, right on Lake Michigan. It's pretty. So I did those things, but I wanted to get back to one other medical mission. In 2000, I was the OIC for what was called a medical readiness training exercise, MedRed 02526, 6 months of planning. We deployed to Honduras in September, and I was advance party. I did about 5 weeks there, but Hurricane Mitch went through the peninsula in 1996, wiped out Honduras, about 60,000 people killed. The rivers, the infrastructure, wiped it out. American military comes through, the Army National Guard engineering. They rebuild the highways, they rebuild the schools, they do all these other things. And then we have a series of medical missions, these medical readiness training missions, scattered, mostly Army Reserve units across the United States, 1 month at a time. We deployed there in, so we had a medical team, a dental team, and a veterinary team. And again, moved into Soto Cano Air Base, which my good friend Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North was stationed there previously. Comiagua is the town, and right in central Honduras. Soto Cano Air Base, Joint Task Force Bravo. We're the medical element of Joint Task Force Bravo. So we went over that period of time. We did 8 missions with. We were truck-borne with our Humvees and our 5 tons, our 7 tons. Let me tell you what the Humvee can do, man. We went across rivers that were 3 feet deep and over rocks and sand and on and on. And then we were airlifted active duty Chinooks. CH-47s took us into remote Indian villages to provide care. Again, fascinating. Dangerous place. Dramatically more dangerous now, sadly. We had good old United States Marines as our security force. 8 good Marines led by a staff sergeant. But the key thing there, we went in there, and these beautiful Hondurans, and we go over there thinking we're these great American professionals, vets, docs, medics, and we're coming down there to take care of you. And we were humbled pretty darn quickly. Those beautiful people who live simple and God-fearing, wonderful folks, we all came out of there. And by the way, and so I had to link this all together. We linked up with American Peace Corps volunteers in these villages, several church relief groups, because we needed language skills and all of the logistical, which we set that up ahead of time. But it was a fascinating sense of accomplishment. We all came back humbled. We're the ones that were blessed by that experience. And we did do good too.
Mm-hmm.
And then we passed the flag to the next unit. And you know, it's sad what's gone on in Venezuela since and so forth. And again, Honduras, narcotics is just,
Mm-hmm.
it's a dangerous damn place. And that's sad because those people are good people. So that was a great experience. Loved it.
Now, where
Saw
were you?
people perform.
Where were you when 9/11 happened?
Yes, sir. I was 2011.
Oh, 2001. We hope.
Or
9/11,
2001 rather, yeah, 2001. Let me think here. You know, it's funny. I remember exactly where I was as a civilian. I was in a meeting with a customer,
Yeah.
and happened to have that you know, for a break here. Let me think real quick. I was back to the medical group
Mm-hmm.
in Grand Rapids, and now I'm the executive officer of the medical group. So
Okay.
again, we're spinning up
Mm-hmm.
units. Very quickly after that, I moved into the, by 2004, I'm infantry,
Right.
and then we start sending troops. But 2011, yeah, or 2001 rather, with the medical group.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't send any units overseas because Afghanistan is pretty much a quick reaction
Mm-hmm.
force.
Right.
You know, it takes a while. Of course, we have nothing in Iraq until 2003,
Yeah.
2004.
Yeah.
I'm an infantry battalion commander, 339th, and then then we are sending. I had 60 troops forward,
Mm-hmm.
and then now let me take that back. About 25 troops forward during those 2 years. Another 60 troops mobilized across the United States, and we were the round-out battalion for the 29th Infantry Division, which is the school, the infantry
Mm-hmm.
school at Fort Benning. There's 3 battalions active duty. We were the reserve
Mm-hmm.
last battalion. The interesting thing, and those who listening to this who have experience in the military, we were a very rank-heavy unit. I had 293 soldiers in 4 states, so
Mhm.
5 companies, headquarters, and Alpha Company in Fraser, Michigan, near Warren. Bravo Company was in Richmond, Indiana, about an hour east of Indianapolis. Charlie Company was Milwaukee, and Delta Company was Waukegan, Illinois. And as a battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel, I had my command sergeant major, my staff. I had 14 full-time personnel, active guard, reserve in uniform, and one civilian. And I had 18 master sergeants, E8s. That's huge. I had 105 sergeants first class.
Mm-hmm.
And 80 or so 70 SS, had 4 I think 11 specialists.
Mm-hmm.
That is an upside down unit.
Yeah.
And the reason was we were the committee battalion, so all of my troops moved to Fort Benning, and they were committee chiefs. Everything from United States mines to basic rifle marksmanship, medical training, field navigation, mortars, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. So they were the committee chiefs that moved down there, and then they actually had active duty subordinates training. It was a fascinating mission, and as I say, then two killed in action in Iraq and 7 wounded, and so we were part of the force, so we did good.
When you made the transition into infantry, did you have to do an infantry school at some point, or had you done that earlier?
I had, I already had infantry basic done. Yep. So it was actually, again, for those who may be informed more than the common duck on this subject, it was called a branch immaterial. We were an infantry battalion training battalion, ITB technically, infantry training battalion, not a go-to-war infantry unit. We did go to war as in pieces, not as an entire unit, but again, what was supposed to. So many times it happened to me, it happened to other units. There's plans to, worst case scenario, plan on this, and then things don't happen. So we initially were going to deploy to Iraq, training the Iraqi infantry as a unit. And quite frankly, there was a lot of disappointment. We wanted to do that. I sure as heck wanted to do it. We were ready. Then the next base was we were going to deploy to Fort Benning as a battalion, truly rounding out. Fort Benning's mission didn't expand as quickly as they thought, so we did deploy a company there, and then some of our troops went to Fort Bliss, to Fort Hood, had some at Fort Jackson, all doing infantry training in subsets at those. A lot to watch over, and I had just a fantastic staff. And Command Sergeant Major Paul Bianco, I will throw his name out. He was phenomenal. He went on, actually was the youngest Command Sergeant Major in the Army Reserve at the time, and he went on to the 85th Division, Custer Division. He went from Battalion Command Sergeant Major to the Command Sergeant Major for a 2-star general.
Okay.
He made a jump. I don't think it's ever happened before.
Okay, so he skipped brigade level and went up to division level.
Sure did. Police officer in Kalamazoo, phenomenal guy. Love Paul. Haven't seen him in a couple of years. He's now retired. Wonderful mentor. He went on and just he molded good troops. Good man. And there's a whole lot of others I could talk about. Let me tell you, good people.
Okay. All right. So can I go back into your own career? So during what period of time were you the infantry battalion commander?
That was 2004 to 2006. June of 04 to February of 2000, August of 2006.
Okay. And then what did you do after that?
Then I went into retired reserve,
Okay.
actually. Combination of things, job, heavy duty, and again, this is a theme. You know, these twice the citizen, these members of our Guard and Reserve, one of our examples is a 3-legged stool. You know, we all, for most good people, family comes first. And then who puts bread on the table? Civilian employer. And then affiliation with Army Reserve, Army Guard, Air Reserve, Naval Reserve, Coast Guard Reserve, Marine Corps Reserve. That's our that fills out that extra 20 hours on a 70-hour work week. And we miss weddings, and we miss Mother's Day, and we miss children's birthdays, and all those other things. It's tough. So when push comes to shove, if family says make a decision, most of us say, okay, family, I love you. It's family. When employer, either based on ignorance or worse, says make a decision, well, okay. And we can't afford to do that. We can't, because the same stellar performers in the civilian sector are the same stellar performers in uniform. The occasional deadwood, poor performers that we have in the civilian sector, if they're in uniform, we try to get rid of them as soon as possible, but they're the same deadwood. Most are in that higher, third band where they're trying hard and they're doing well. So I had that happening. Had lost my daughter Elizabeth, had died. That was a tough thing to go through. Company knew I was in the natural gas business, working for a wonderful company called Charlevoix Energy Trading Company, which has since been bought out. I was a natural gas wellhead gas sales and fascinating, all the big industry institutions in Michigan. But boy, I'll tell you, it was tough. I was the senior guy. I had to give up. So I went into retired reserve and wanted to come back. And certain things happened, and I came back in then in 2010. And right into the 75th Division Battle Command, and that's how I finished off those last 4 years.
Okay.
Loved it.
So you were basically a staff officer with them, or?
I was the deputy branch chief for and again in the military we're always changing designations and acronyms and things like that, but we were Battle Command Training Division with 5 brigades in the United States. My brigade was at Fort Sheridan with a branch in Livonia. That term changed from Battle Command to Mission Command. The brigade changed to Great Lakes Division. But what we essentially did, 75th Division is the executive agency for this training, which is best thought of as scrimmaging. Before units deployed to Kosovo, we had Kosovo missions, Afghanistan, AFRICOM missions, military or multinational peacekeeping Sinai. So we had a variety. And then Kosovo big, Afghanistan, Iraq. So what we would do before a unit deployed, back to this process of validating, it's like getting your driver's test for a unit. and we would work with staff at our level, and then below battalion they'd be in the field. But what we would do is we'd take them through what were called command post culminating training exercises. Kosovo as an example, and I headed up a lot of those. They would see in 14 days of heavy duty training, did a lot of it at Camp Atterbury, a very historic base south of Indianapolis, Fort McCoy, Fort Bragg, Fort Hood, Texas, and El Paso. We would take a unit through 14 days of stress, so they would be deploying to Kosovo in this one example, a 12-month rotation to Kosovo. In 14 days of simulation, they would see 6 months of activity to stress them out, to see that that staff could use muscle memory to do their jobs. And they came out sweating, and so did we, because we were exhausted. And so I was the deputy branch chief during those 4 years, for most of those 4 years. So I was the commander, I was the commander's executive officer, and again, fascinating, in charge of everything. I did that both active duty, mobilized. I was mobilized in 2010 through 2011, and then back in reserve duty. Again, the common themes here, Jim. Just good people working hard for a great cause. Yeah. And, the camaraderie, the sense of satisfaction. Just, when we see Old Glory flying, we there's reverence. We just think, wow.
And what you're doing with a unit like this, maybe a lot of the times you hear from the people who do deploy and go overseas and so forth, they talk about the training sessions and programs they go through and the places they go. And of course, somebody's got to be there on those bases doing those things and running the programs that they're actually in. And so you're filling in actually a lot for a lot of these other stories in terms of, again, how that larger system works. And you tend to talk about the size of the tail versus
the tooth. Exactly, yes, indeed.
And that's really all part of this big picture. So that helps us to get at a lot of that. Now, today you're sort of retired reserve, so there's still the remote possibility you could be called up for the next couple of years? Or
well, yeah, and some of us think is the hopeful call. I mean, we want. I'm ready to go. So on this subject, just real quick, and this kind of gets into other less known realities for civilians and even people in uniform. Active duty retirement, 20 years of active federal service, a sailor, soldier, Marine, can start drawing retired pay right away. And they earn that. And of course, when they're coming out at 20 years old, the actuary tables say they don't get much because they're going to be drawing forever. So similarly with reserve, and of course it's one military, whether you're Navy, Army, it's all the same thing. So reserve retirements likewise earned at 20 years. And oh, by the way, and this kind of gets back to, again, respecting, understanding, saluting those who served. 18 years of active federal service is zero retirement. 18 and a half years, and there's a couple of things there. There's and again, part of our job is, and I've experienced this one time, one of the toughest things I ever had to do when I was an infantry battalion commander is I had to, and this was a hell of a long, grinding, tough process, but I had to kick a soldier out of the unit at 18 years, out of the United States Army, and deny that female soldier a retirement because it was necessary based on a whole lot of insubordination and all kinds of problems. But likewise, Army Reserve duty, 16 years of 20. If you work for a corporation, 16 years of a 20-year retirement or 30-year retirement is still worth some money that you can get and put into a 401k. That's not the case in the military. You got to cross that finish line. That's 20 years. And you get something, all of us in the military, there's a special, it's called the 20-year letter. As a kid, I remember my dad talking about it. What? 20-year letter. It's that document. It's like a diploma. It says you got it. You got it. Now, do you keep on serving? You add to that value, yes or no? So again, a difference between active duty and reserve. For our reservists, and this kind of gets also back into respecting what they do. An Army reservist who serves for 25 years, or a naval reservist, whatever, 25 years, and then decide, if they're enlisted, they don't get to just say goodbye until that enlistment contract anniversary. If you're an officer, you request retirement. Another thing with an officer, we have if we resign our commission, we cut the strings. We also cut cost of living advance, but we cut the strings. Uncle Sam cannot call us back. Most of us do not do that. We go into retired reserve activity, which means we will go if necessary, and there's a benefit to that. So a reservist, though, normally does not get to start drawing the retired pay until age 60. So there's a lot of Navy reservists that retired at the age of 40, and they have to wait 20 years. And guess what? They may not make that 20 years. There's a survivor benefit program where survivor spouse can get 55% of it, but a lot of people don't. So in my case, now, and this is another really good thing that President Bush, President Bush initiated, changing our retirement system, and now President Donald Trump is doing wonderful, wonderful things for the military and for America in furthering this. But allowing active duty service mobilizations to provide a potential earlier retirement date gets into also the post 9/11 GI Bill, where we can give our benefits to our children or our spouse. Good things, long overdue. President Trump just recently enhanced this wonderfully. It's good. So in my case, make a long story short, I will, and there's technical dating in there, but I'll be able to start drawing retirement at age 59 versus 60.
Okay.
Benefits don't hit until age 60. Medical benefits, space available, some of those other things. But all in all, we don't do it for the money, Jim.
Okay.
We do not do it for the money.
And
but that's kind of nice. We do get a little money out of it.
Just to the very end of this particular tape, which is about to shut off, but I think
sir.
we managed to get you right down to the end of the career. So thank you very much for taking the time to share the story.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to be part of